Hello, everyone. Today I'm with Michael Vannoy Adams, and Michael is an internationally prominent Jungian analyst in New York City. He's a teacher, writer, speaker, painter, and photographer. He's also clinical associate professor at the New York University Postdoctoral Program. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure.
Michael, our conversation for today is called On the Couch with Michael Vannoy Adams, and I think we're taking up the topic of free thought, free speech, and free association. Just by way of starting, I was thinking this morning, in Hillman's The Myth of Analysis, the first essay is on psychological creativity, but the second one is on psychological language. And I just took something from it this morning. He said, the Viennese psychoanalysts, sorry, I find it hard reading my own writing. The Viennese psychoanalysts let the soul freely associate and make its radical, uncouth statements. Its fantasies soared. The establishment was shocked by its methods and its language, but it unleashed a new psychological speech. Psychology was in touch with the soul. It had imagination. And today, psychology, even depth psychology, is a tool of the establishment. And just one other thing that Hillman said in there, not in that actual essay, but he said elsewhere, the murder of speech is the self-murder of the human animal, a suicidal evisceration of our species-specific endowment. Like tigers without their stripes, like beached whales and blind eagles, are we without our rhetoric. Speech is our body, speech is our shape, speech is our beauty. So I must say, one thing, because I knew we were doing this morning, and I was thinking, Hillman really gets fired up about this topic, and I respond to it well, because he's obviously so clearly passionate about speech and language. But over to you. Can you tell us about psychoanalysis, therapy, and speech?
Thank you for arranging this little conversation between you and me today. And I'm really looking forward to it. Also, thank you for sharing those quotations from James. It's nothing I recollect having read, although I've read The Myth of Analysis more than once, although not recently. But it's one of his very best books. It's not my favorite, but it's in the top 3 or 4, I would say, of the books that I think are his best. I hadn't recollected that he had talked so much about free association and free speech. Free association in some funny way, even though it's in our conversation tonight about the sort of 3 things: free thought, free speech, and free association. Free association is traditionally freely associated with Freud. The funny thing there is that we're not talking at this moment about the political realm where free speech is under extreme duress as a value these days.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get around to talking about that a little bit.
Yeah.
But perhaps it's valuable to talk about free speech and free association in psychoanalysis. Broadly speaking, Freudian, Jungian, and other forms of analysis, and the role it's played traditionally, and the role, if any, that it plays now. And what are the antecedents sort of archetypal antecedents of trying to set up establish conditions where one is able to. I mean, it's an enabling condition, some kind of situation that you establish that enables people to make contact with what I like to call generally the other dimension. Now, before psychology or before psychoanalysis, the other dimension, it seems to me, was thought of mainly in something you could call religious terms. You would go, instead of going to a psychoanalytic office to lie on a couch with that sort of furnishings, I mean, you have an office, you invite the person in at the beginning of the hour, you close the door, you ensure the person that everything between you and the individual is confidential, that nobody will breathe a word of it outside the analytic session,
Yeah.
and that it's like Vegas. Everything in Vegas stays in Vegas. If you're over in there, like my dear friend Stan Marlin, if you're a fan of alchemy in that model, then, you know, the classic Freudian Jungian thing is to think of the office as the vase, or if you're a Texan, you say vase.
Or retort. Is it retort? Is that the other?
Yes, the retort. That's a funny word when you think about having a retort to somebody, but yeah, it's like a test tube, and it's in a laboratory. It's an alchemical laboratory, and you put the things in this thing. It's like a pressure cooker. The idea is that you need the vas bene clausum. This is the fancy Latin for it. This is the vase, the well-sealed vase, or the hermetically sealed vase. It's some kind of thing where, in order for the transformation or the transmutation of metals or the transformation of consciousness to occur, for things to cook well in the lab when you turn the heat on for the experiment, you know, you have to establish certain conditions for it. And one of the things is to keep the stopper in the bottle. Yeah. You do not let the energy dissipate by taking the lid off, or by taking the cork out, or by leaving the door open, or by telling somebody else what your client said to you, or telling or the client telling his wife what he said or you said in the analytic session. You keep it all in the place. There's a theory here. I mean, you know, it might be wrong, but there's an idea of why we're doing it the way we're doing it. And the way is that it won't work unless we keep this pressure on in some way during this moment. The transformation or the transmutation of consciousness or of the substances just won't happen properly. You won't get a good result from the experiment that you're conducting. Now, over in the religious realm, you've got synagogues and churches and mosques and other kinds of generic temples. My family is partly Sikh, and so we have gurdwaras, you know, and you go to some kind of place maybe at least once a week, and you go into this space, which is again a safe space. It's where you it's a space where you can introvert and you can contact the thing that's we would say within. William Blake said that his big revolution in his thing on heaven and hell was that the gods are all reside in the human breast. He didn't say in the head, he said in the breast. As a romantic poet, he was saying, but he's saying that they're not out there somewhere. They're not in some transcendent realm, some other dimension somewhere out in the woods or in the trees or in the rivers. He's not an animist in that way. He's saying he's becoming psychological in the 1800s. The romantic poets are. They are inventing psychology, and then you, at the end of the century, you get Freud and Jung and psychoanalysis and these kinds of things. They're kind of an extension of this.
And Michael, can I just say, like, you know, from as the lay observer in a way, it's like the Victorian era strikes one as a little repressed, doesn't it? Like there was this kind of outer strict outer persona or whatever, and God knows what was going on within the psyche or the soul. And then Freud kind of allowed people. It's like he took the lid off uh, through free association to speak in that environment. I mean, that's kind of the guts of it, isn't it? The beginning of Freud.
Well, I think that's a very good way of looking at it. And Stephen Marcus, who was a Columbia University English professor and a very fine one and famous one, like Lionel Trilling and some of these other people, Stephen Marcus, they were the first wave of after Columbia stopped its anti-Semitic and Jewish quotas and things like that, and suddenly they had famous and impressive Jewish professors. Marcus was one of them. Lionel Trilling was another, and they were all very interested in psychoanalysis. And Marcus was the person who bridged the 3-volume biography of Freud by Ernest Jones. So you can get the 1-volume Stephen Marcus thing. But he also was famous before that for having written a book called, maybe the reason he got the gig to do the abridged version of the biography was that he had written a book called The Other Victorians. This was the underbelly or the seamy side or the it's like Jekyll and Hyde. It's like the what happens at night in the streets of London.
There was the fine upstanding citizen, and then there was the Knights of London, which were never the twain shall meet.
And well, Queen Victoria didn't she have a little thing going on with her writing instructor or something like that? I don't know what. Equerry, is that what they call it? I don't know what these fancy English words are. But he wrote, there was Frank Harris who wrote My Life, which was all about his sexual escapades during the Victorian period. So it's not exactly as if people weren't sexually active. It was just that they were doing it under cover of night in some way. And you have to also remember, this is in a period before there were any kind of prophylaxis. I mean, there were no rubbers or whatever you call them in Australia. There were no French letters. The best you had was something that was an animal skin, like pig gut or something of that sort of thing. You didn't have latex, and you didn't have rubber, and so it was a revolution to have any kind of birth control. Also, the church was against any kind of birth control. So, you have Margaret Sanger in the United States and all these things. This is a big revolution, and Freud is there at that moment, and it's no accident in some way. It's not weird at all that he would somehow, as I would put it, makes the mistake to overemphasize sexuality as the repressed. As James said later, he says, at different periods in history, this could be repressed or that could be repressed. At one point, it might be religion that's repressed.
Yeah.
The content of repression at some point, what you are not allowed to think about or you're not allowed to speak about might vary over time, depending on kind of who's around and what they think they're observing about the planet.
Yeah.
At that time, with Queen Victoria and the stiff upper lip British and all of the empire and all this, well then, and just the practical things.
Let's you being American and me being Australian, let's have a go at the British for a moment. Whilst they can't interfere.
They would say something like fair enough. They would try to be good sports about it, I guess. But we're just louts and we're crude and we're not well behaved and we're basically not repressed. And we wave our. We're not like the Italians. We don't wave our arms around or anything like that. But I'm just saying there are different forms of expression and. There are in the so-called what used to be called the colonies or the empire or the Commonwealth or whatever out there somewhere in the New World. Apparently, certain kinds of things are people are willing to not stand on ceremony so much. It's like the first line in Moby Dick. It's like, call me Ishmael. It's like don't call me sir. Let's not do all this. Ceremony. Let's just say what you just get out with it and say what you think and let's get on with the conversation. And there are no protocols. And so I'm saying that that thing is there too. With you have to go through all of the decorum and all this. You have to curtsy to the queen, and this, that, and the
Yeah,
other.
yeah,
You
yeah.
have to do
It
all of
was an
these things, the
incredible,
rigmarole.
and I remember reading, sometimes when people speak about this particular topic, the corset and the clothing and just the restriction. But I mean, I'm getting two things from you, or from our conversation up to now. Is there's one is this kind of like this, what is it? This taking the lid off a certain kind of repression. But the other is as therapy, as I mean, I suppose as religion, as God has died or religion has waned or whatever, the therapy seems to have taken up this place for conversation, or this.
Yeah, it's done that in two ways, I think, John. One way I don't enjoy or appreciate, and that's what I call psychomoralysis instead of psychoanalysis.
Right.
It's to this is James and other people have recognized that one of the that religion is a precursor to psychoanalysis, or it's one of them. It's one of the prototypes for this kind of activity.
Yeah.
Jung himself says that the religions are basically systems of psychotherapy, is what he says. Uh, they're not identical with or the same as
No.
psychoanalysis. You see, they are not psychological. They are some other kind of thing, all their own, and they deserve respect for that and all that. I'm not simply running around saying, well, let's replace them with psychology, but I am saying that they're different. I'm saying they're different. And so when you talk about the space, the safe space that the religions have, I mean, Jung says in volume 16 of his works on psychotherapy, he says there are four stages to the analytic process. It ends with transformation. The first stage of the four is confession. So he is saying that a prototype of psychoanalysis, even though his father was a Protestant minister and not a Catholic and all that, he's saying that the Catholic confessional is one prototype of this process, just as alchemy is another.
Yeah.
Just as mythology is, Jung is he's not interested in becoming a mythologist or an alchemist or an astrologer or any of these things. Some Jungians are actually, but Jung is not interested. He's interested in becoming a psychologist and understanding these other systems, these earlier systems, as prototypes or precursors of analysis, of our becoming psychological. And taking the thing down out of the supernatural. The other dimension is no longer a transcendent supernatural thing. It's a natural thing, and it's located in the human breast, as Blake said, or up here, as Jung is and Freud are saying, in the psyche somehow. And they locate he does that thing with Mountain Lake when he's out in Navajo land. He's out in Taos, New Mexico, and he's having this conversation, and the chief says, red men think with their hearts and white men think with their heads. There is that kind of like, where do you locate the other dimension is a very interesting kind of question. Jung talks about this, frankly, in terms of something he's got a theoretical concept for. It is psychic localization. So the chakras you have this interest in India, the system there, or Kundalini yoga, that whole thing about there being localized centers within the organism where their libido is, or kundalini. Kundalini is just a synonym for libido. It's where your energy is centered at the moment. So if it's in your heart, you have the Richard the Lionhearted and the heart of courage, or you have a Valentine's card, the heart of love, or that's where your libido is located at the moment. And so then, so it could be in your head. Jungians used to criticize me. They would use it as a weapon against me since I was an academic and I was a so-called intellectual and a thinker and all that. They would say, you're up in your head. See, you're up in your head. This is like a curse that they would say. And so,
but what I'm really getting from you, Michael, is therapy as the space to draw on different parts. You know, I mean, if we wanted to use the analogy of the chakra, you know, I mean, that's when I began therapy. I think immediately, I remember the therapist would say, "Oh, where's that coming from?" You know, and I'd become in your body, and I'd become very aware of, wow, that's really coming from my heart. That, you know, and I found that to be, I mean, it's simple in one way, but it's also a very powerful thing. And so it's like eliciting speech from another place, eliciting the speech from the heart. Well, you know, to use the jargon, we've got the persona out there that we use at work or something, you know, and then we go to therapy and we speak from our heart, or we speak from somewhere else, or we speak from our gut, or which is a fantastic opening, a liberation in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what is, just going back to psycho, I mean, it seems to me what you're saying, like that's really what therapy's doing in
I'm
your
saying
view.
Freud, if you're talking about what made psychoanalysis revolutionary,
Yeah.
or what Freud's real revolution was, I
Yeah.
don't think it was about sex.
No.
I think it was about his developing a new technique that would be a kind of a secular version of these other precursors, where you would you would establish the conditions, call it an office instead of a synagogue, and
Yeah.
you'd go there at least once a week. In his day, maybe four times a week, and you would not kneel on a cushion and lower your head and close your eyes and pray. You would lie on a couch, and it would be at right angles to the analyst. The analyst would look in this direction. If you go to the Freud Museum in London, the green leather chair is pointed this way, and the couch is down that way.
And
So
why was that again? Why what was that for?
It's like a sensory deprivation chair. Well, first of all, Freud was tried hypnosis earlier. But either he wasn't good at it, which is one of the stories, or there was some other reason. Oh, the theoretical reason that he claimed he abandoned it was that if you put somebody into a real hypnotic trance, it was too deep for the ego to be sufficiently present throughout the process to register the changes that were happening. So they were evanescent. Whatever change happened dissipated because you were in too deep a trance. And so there was a Scandinavian historian of psychoanalysis, or philosopher of psychoanalysis, Mikkel Borch-Jakobson, who wrote a very fine book on the relationship between hypnosis and free association.
Right.
You know, it's a great book. And he's really trying to make a link there, because, you know, certain kinds of Freudians want to say Freud was totally original. But that's not the case. All of us come out of some kind of tradition in some way, or even if we don't know we're coming out of it, somebody else points out that there were these people before us who did something similar. And so that's what he is doing here, and saying that you make this thing, that Mesmer was before it too, right? And Freud knew all of this. There were two schools of hypnosis, and he was in one of them. There was hypnotic suggestion and these other kinds of things that you would do. So
but he'd like you to have some awareness in the process. Is that what you're saying? Like,
well, he
for
wanted
the patient to be certain.
One of the things was he was like a fanatic about originality. He wanted to be the person who invented everything, and he wasn't. Nobody is.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to say, I've come up with something brand new, which is called free association.
Right.
Okay. And so that's how it was presented. And it is different in some respect, but it's kind of like a light trance that he puts you on. He used to put his hand on the women's foreheads, the hysterical women's foreheads, when he was doing the hypnosis, to try to induce the trance, right, you know, to get them to get into contact with the unconscious. He wasn't any good about that. I mean, it was a failure. And so dropped that, and he came up with this other thing and made a rationalization for why he was doing it. And that's what he proceeded with. But the idea is that, you know, this is one of the things we discussed in the preliminaries up to this evening, or this morning for you. It's that, well, I've lost my train of thought. I'm not, I need to go free associate on the couch again. Well, I don't know. Why don't let's
I,
take up some.
I would like to ask you one question, though. I mean, it might be a bit obtuse, but this whole thing of people being diagnosed as hysterics, and again, this is just a bit of a backyard kind of psychological stab at it. But, you know, we've got this thing of diagnosis, right? But then, maybe in these repressed times, let's say sexuality was maybe more of an issue in the Victorian era or whatever, then maybe it was just the speech of the soul that was uh, uh, so repressed that it needed that space to be able to talk, that there needed to be a psychological language, that there needed to be speech. I mean, what's the link between hysteria and speech and free thought and association?
Well, as I understand it, the traditional explanation of that is that the hysteric becomes histrionic or theatrical, or starts, throwing pots and pans and screaming and, I don't know, doing all sorts of other communicative acts because they're sort of in desperation because you're not hearing what they're saying with fewer decibels.
Yeah.
Like if you were present to them in a way and were really listening and hearing to what they were saying in a normal tone of voice, then they wouldn't feel the necessity of taking it to this other level.
Yeah.
And so that's why
the need for speech.
It gets very dramatic, is what I'm saying. That's really that's why they have. It's not just that they, I don't know, are offended that people would talk about your wandering womb. That's one dimension of the critique of hysteria as a concept. But more than that, it's that they are really trying to say we think that histrionic is a better word for what's really happening here, which is somebody's being dramatic, like a drama queen. Somebody's being a drama queen because they can't think they're denting your thick skull with regular language. They have to act out. They have to act it out instead of talking to you about it because you're being a jerk with the thing.
Yeah.
So that's the speech thing around hysteria is a form of speech, but it's a kind of enactment speech.
Yeah.
It's like displaying with your much more bodily in some weird way than using words. And it's, as James is saying, he's saying that humans are not Homo sapiens. I don't know, they're Homo linguans or something. They're like the language is what defines them as a species. And so if you look at our special characteristic is using language rather than, communicating with some other way, then,
and this is just a general comment. And again, it's coming in from the side maybe, but one thing I've often thought about Jung is that how he's brought a language for a lot of what goes on inside of me or whatever. So I was vaguely aware of certain things, and then Jung has brought this language where he starts talking about things. He starts talking about anima mundis and mysterious tremendums or whatever. So it's like that articulation or that giving of the language is another liberation, isn't it? It's a way of thinking about life in wider terms and being able to speak is a freeing kind of thing. Because if there's not the speech, I think, what did he use the term crude? There's just the crude enactment or the crude speech, the partial speech. That's when the animal's kind of not at full operation.
You're absolutely right. This is to take the conversation in a little bit different direction, but it's an important direction, which is I think there are some people like Jung being a kind of polymath and a kind of exceptional person who is interested in just about everything on the planet. And he tries to become an expert in these things. I mean, he really tries to become erudite in all of these different subjects and things. He just can't help himself. He's just totally interested. His libido knows no bounds in what it attaches itself to. And so he's got to go investigate this and think about this and wonder about this. And so he's not like everybody else. He is a sort of exceptional person in that way.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean he's God. It just means that he's a little bit strange and kind of wonderful in what he goes. And so, of course, he's expanding the possibilities. It's not like he's fighting repression, but he's expanding beyond what people just take for granted or think is the way to be.
The normal bandwidth, you know, of regular society.
That's a different dimension to it than repressing it. See, that's just that he's got a broader, he has a more capacious view of reality and what's interesting than the average person has. And that's one of the reasons people are so fascinated by him. You know, they can't get enough of him because there's a whole lot there more in him than in most people.
Yeah.
He has winning, his libido is in many, many other interests than most people. Most people have one or two things going on, and he's got multifarious things going on.
Yeah.
But can I just return to one thing before we kind of like end it up here? And that is, I'd like to go back for a second and say something about the precursors to the analytic office and the free association thing. Free association or free thought and free speech in any form of analysis is so important because without it, psychoanalysis cannot happen. The thing does not function. It doesn't work. You have to have the person in some situation where the person is guaranteed privacy and confidentiality to bare his soul, or whatever you want to call it, bare his chest, get things off his chest or off his soul freely, and to feel free to articulate these things, free, first of all, to think them. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go back and quote something that I wrote in a book review on Michel Foucault's History of Sexuality 45 years ago in Commentary magazine in New York. And I went back and looked at this. I'm quite proud of the way I wrote this at that time. It's like almost half a century ago. And you go back and you look at something, you think, well, that wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
And so this is what I said. For Freud, repression is the strictly internal process. It's not somebody from the outside suppressing you or oppressing you. It's a strictly internal process by which thought is excluded from the conscious and confined in the unconscious. So in the first place, it's not about speech. It's about where thought is excluded. It is, as I said, an involuntary forgetting. You haven't suppressed it. Repression is not suppression. Suppression is to voluntarily stop something or to make it impossible. But repression is some kind of autonomic or automatic process that occurs without your ego putting it down, so to speak. It just happens. Something becomes inaccessible to you. And so it is an involuntary forgetting and a hopeless attempt at remembering. And then I said, the repressed is what we cannot, try as we may, even think about. So before it's not something we could speak about, it's something we can't think about. And this is what I said to you in an earlier email exchange with you, is like Freud's idea and Jung's idea at that time was that if you are unconscious in this way, then this is what makes you sick.
Yeah.
That reason to have free association is that it is the thing that grants you access to the inaccessible, which is the unconscious. And that is the thing that allows you then to analyze the psyche by interpreting the unconscious. If you can't get access to the unconscious, you can't interpret it. You can't become conscious of what it means. And therefore, the entire operation is defunct. It just doesn't work.
So what we're saying is in my language, one is unconscious of certain things, therefore they're repressed, because one is unconscious of them, and one goes to therapy, and it's a leading out. It's a drawing out. You know, when what do they say? Educare is a drawing out, but therapy also is, and so that is the.
Well, that's the third stage of this process that Jung talks about in psychotherapy. The first is confession. The second is elucidation or something like that, and the third is education, and the fourth is transformation.
Yeah.
And so he's got something like educare in there as a stage in the process.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that in their vocabulary, their pathological vocabulary as medical doctors,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not, and so I don't speak this language. I don't think of psychoanalysis this way, but in their way of thinking is it repression is the thing, or not being able to think or speak freely is what makes you sick. You know, this is mental illness if you can't do this. And so we're going to create a new thing called psychoanalysis that's going to be the talking cure. See, that's why it's called, it could be called the speaking cure.
But you know, but it's just so incredibly important when you contrast this, and I know I might be jumping ahead a little bit, right? But everything you've said, okay, the animal becomes sick when it's not aware and
when it can't express itself,
when it can't express itself, when it doesn't have its speech, when it doesn't have its stripes, when the tiger doesn't have its stripes, right? So all that you're talking about is the guts of therapy in my language. Sorry, I'm from Western Australia. In Texas, I know they speak a lot better than.
Well, guts is another place where the psyche can get located. You know, people do have a gut feeling, and they have a gut consciousness, and it's another chakra. You know, this is
yes, that's right. But when I contrast it with maybe the present political environment, or not just the political environment, but the spirit of the times, the kind of zeitgeist, you know, of say the correct thing, don't say the incorrect thing. You know, the whole thing about speech within our normal society, they seem a little at odds, because on one hand you've got therapy saying this, and then on the other hand you've got this cultural force.
If I may say so, dear friend, I think that probably is going to have to be part two, because you know, like moving from the psychoanalytic framework, which emphasizes the benefits to free thought and free speech, to the speaker. You know, the other thing is about the benefits or the detriments to the hearer. That's why these people want to suppress free speech or hate speech or whatever they want to call it, because they're concerned. I'm not saying their concerns are completely illegitimate. I'm just saying I don't know whether this is the an intelligent approach to solving the problem, if there is a problem. But there's obviously these days on the contemporary scene, there's some effort to suppress or restrict hate speech or misinformation or disinformation or whatever. In this last week, the European Union has taken Elon Musk to task, and the French have arrested Durov. I didn't even know who he was. I didn't know what Telegram was, but now I do know. They have arrested him because he would not let them wiretap people. And so, you know, I don't pretend to know what the merits of the case are. I just know that there are various interest groups out there that are trying to limit what people can say in what medium. Okay, and this is a very interesting question, and a question I think of legitimate concern for people these days. And so,
Well,
but
I
that's
mean, the basic thing is, okay, I go along to therapy, right? I come along and see you. Um, and after 15 years of extensive analysis, one would imagine my speech is more liberated. I've been somehow those unconscious contents have come more to the fore, and that comes into speech. And then I go out onto the street, and there's a countervailing force. You know, there's a force which seems somewhat different. So for the individual, what does the individual make of all of that?
Well, this is a different and an interesting and an important issue, and that is the psychoanalytic office with its privacy and confidentiality and all that.
Mm.
See, we in America have the Health Insurance Portability and Something Act, HIPAA, and it is there primarily it's about privacy of health information and all this.
Yeah.
Every email I send out has a HIPAA statement at the bottom of it that I abide by this law. I have to notify everybody that any electronic communication may compromise their something, and that they really shouldn't trust. They shouldn't trust what we're doing right now. They should find some other way to talk to me, like in private around the corner, and meet in secret once a week, and then we can maybe we wouldn't be wiretapped or compromised in some way. But the privacy issue in psychoanalysis is to enable free association to occur, which then enables the analysis of the psyche to occur, which is synonymous with the interpretation of the unconscious to occur, which then puts the kibosh on repression, so that you can be an expressive person. That's why I said it used to be the unexamined life is worth living, and then the psychoanalyst came along and said the unanalyzed life is not worth living, and then I, brilliant genius that I am, I said the inexpressive life is not worth living.
Yeah.
Like if you can't, the fundamental thing is you ought to be able to express yourself.
And you see it like anecdotally. Even if I think of friends on Facebook that have gone towards the therapeutic, all of a sudden they're doing art, or they're doing journal writing, or they're posting their writing, on social media. So there seems such a movement towards the creative, in people as they get more involved and they get more expressive. And I find that to be the really fabulous thing about therapy myself. I mean, that's what endorses therapy, amongst many other things probably, but that's what confirms it for me, that process towards expression.
This is the whole other thing that I haven't really gotten into in the last few days. It occurred to me as I was working on thinking about our conversation today. John Dewey popped into my mind because he wrote a book called Art as Expression or something like that. I think that's the title of it.
Yeah.
And he had the theory that art was just to express yourself. And I don't think to me, that's not a sufficient definition of art, just to express yourself. So
Yeah.
I feel a little bit, there are other criteria besides just expressivity
Yes, of course.
in the creativity realm.
Yeah.
I'm not sure just that they're synonymous in some way. But I will say that I believe that the psychoanalytic thing is predicated on an idea that if you repress yourself, or if you are repressed and you are not expressing, then you're a sick puppy. I mean, you're going to have a problem. You're going to be disturbed. You're going to be anxious. You're going to be neurotic or psychotic.
Yeah.
And their thing is they have a formula. It might be wrong, but their formula is you should be feel good about in this safe space that we created, this artificial environment, this sensory deprivation chamber that's supposed to induce the possibility that for 50 minutes once a week at least, your unconscious, instead of your ego, that your unconscious ought to have the floor. It
Yeah.
ought to be able to speak, for 50 minutes at least out of all of that time,
Yeah.
and like it can express itself in that time. And if it doesn't have some kind of outlet that, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be
It's like the bird that can't sing, isn't it? Like that's what we're like, really. We need to be able to sing.
Well, I would think that is life. I mean, that's what I'm trying to, like, it's kind of occurring to me as we talk about these things that, like, the worst thing you could have is to prevent somebody from expressing himself or herself.
But
That would be
but when
the worst punishment.
and maybe this is for the next time, Michael, because it's good, like if we can take up, go further from psychoanalysis, what we've spoken about today, but the individual in the present environment, part 2 or whatever. But when I read Hillman, and I'd like to hear, just finally, maybe I'd like to hear your thoughts about this. It's that we take the soul with us wherever we go. So, I might see therapy as a kind of a modeling. So, okay, in therapy, you're allowed to express, and you can express from your heart, or you can express from somewhere else, or wherever. But then isn't it natural that that has to flow into all of my life? I take my soul wherever I go, and then there's be that natural impulse to take it into the wider community. So it's not just that I want to express for 15 minutes.
Well, I'm going to say that these spaces are sort of curated spaces. They're specially designed for this particular purpose.
Right.
And they're sort of like the inner sanctum or the sanctum sanctoris or something like that. They're like the temenos that you're talking about, or they're like the well-sealed vessel.
Yeah.
Like if you, there was never any idea in psychoanalysis that it was a bright idea to take this out into the street immediately. I mean, my analyst, Yoram Kaufman,
Right.
who was a great man, he told me that, now a Freudian analyst, and you said, oh, well, that's a technical error, you see, but Yoram always shook somebody's hand on leaving the office with a good firm grip.
Right.
He wouldn't wait for you to get up and leave on your own. He would, when the time was up, he could see the clock above your head on the other wall over there. You couldn't see the clock. He would see the clock. He would get up from his chair and walk to the door, open the door, and stick his hand out.
So it's
And
finished. He's saying it's finished.
Yes, he would say, it was the way he said that when you walk in the door and close the door, this automatically, you don't have to lie on a couch or anything, automatically. Now, this is his idea, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just his notion that automatically induces an altered state of consciousness.
Yeah. Okay.
As soon as you enter this space, okay, you're like in a trance of some kind. And so it goes for 50 minutes, and then he says time is up, goes over there and grips you and reintroduces you to the material, social, external world, so that when you go outside of the building, you don't get run over by walking into traffic. He's saying that he's inducing for the time, he's inducing an altered state of consciousness, which is a state of dissociation. Free association or something like that is dissociation from your ego. Your ego and your superego are not worried about what you would say. You are supposed to feel free in this time and space to say anything you please. But then you're not supposed to be a damn fool and walk out there and start telling everybody else about it.
No, but I'd like to take this up next time, because I think that it seems a little paradoxical to me, because, it's like, yes, people would make many mistakes, that if one spoke about one's deepest, darkest, shameful, fantasies to the bank manager or something like that, that's probably a mistake.
This is the thing, John. The idea, I think the end here, or the aim, or the objective, would be to help the person become so aware of consciousness as a decision based on his desire. so that when he leaves there and goes outside, he will be in a much better position than he ever was before to weigh whether he thinks it's worth it or not to
Yeah,
speak his mind out there. You
that's
see,
good.
whereas before he was just cowering because he was repressed, or
Mm,
he was a fool because he was just running off at the mouth.
yeah,
You see, but psychoanalysis is supposed to help you get into a position where, as I say, you can lead a more decisive life based on your consciousness of your own desire.
that's
You
good.
know, and like, then you weigh whether the risks are worth the benefits or
Risks
whatever it
and
is. You
rewards.
see,
You do a
but
little, you
you're
do
in
a
a
little
much better position.
risk reward analysis on the move.
Well, it's some kind of thing like that. I mean, I think that's a kind of a funny way to put it, but on the whole, maybe so. You know, you begin to sort of evaluate yourself and think
Yeah,
more carefully about what's important,
yep.
and you don't just either shut down or blow off.
Yeah, yeah. It's good. I think let's leave it there and take it up again, because to me, like what I get is, you've got that incredible kind of richness of the past, the beginnings of psychoanalysis, and the technical distinctions, which are so helpful to, they spark off a lot of thinking. So I'd love to take it up with you again.
Well, I'd love to too, and it's a lot of fun with me, always with you. You're such a swell person as far as I'm concerned, and it's a joy to me to be in these podcasts with you. And I hope it's meaningful to somebody else out there in the world as well.
Thank you, Michael.